We're going to be having discussions across the industries, different spaces, be it economy, be it in the arts, in terms of development, in terms of name it, we'll cover it and we'll have a discussion on it. And just look forward, how do we ensure that we have a sustainable future going forward? So it's an exciting time right now, and especially for the county of Kisumu hosting this. Last year we had it in Kigali, Rwanda. This time we are having it at the lakeside city of Kisumu. And now, just to get into this discussion we're talking about briefly before we get into the panel discussions inside there, I'm going to be speaking to Timothy Owase, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Kenya Film Commission, to just give us a sense of what is the space of film in this and storytelling, telling the African story by Africans, but not only for Africans, but for the world at large. Timothy, thank you for joining us. Maybe you could tell us, we've seen a lot of excitement because like you as KFC also had the mobile phone competition and the likes. One of the questions now is, how do we ensure that we have good quality in terms of the content that is being put out? Because people can now just pick your phone and record something. How do we ensure we've got quality across the board?
First of all, I'm happy to be part of the Kusi Ideas Festival. And we at Kenya Film Commission, as it's stated in our mandate, our role is to ensure that we develop, promote, and market Kenya's film industry. So when we talk about the quality of productions in the country, it is critical for each one of us to note that we produce content, or our practitioners produce content for the market, and not only the local market, but for the international market as well as the local market. So for us to ensure that we meet this requirement, the Commission has various programs of capacity development. Remember, through the Ministry of Education, we have finally concluded on the curriculum for animation and filming, which means all TVET institutions will be able to deliver a curriculum that is fully approved and ready for the industry. You know, it's easy to tell a story, but it's also not easy to tell a story the way you want. You have to meet certain norms that have been set, because audiences are very diverse today. They are looking for content that they can be able to resonate with. And if you are developing or producing content for the international market, then you must meet those standards. Remember, in the recent past, you've seen quite a number of Kenyan products going to the international market through giants like Netflix. We would like to see all our content being acquired by such giants. And for that to be acquired, your question has to be made. Quality is paramount. And how are we doing this? Remember, there are various segments within the industry. There are those who are joining, there are those who are mature enough, and there are those who are growing. So our programs are geared towards various segments within the industry. For those who are starting, it's very easy to apply the very ordinary way of doing production with an aim of growing to a level that is acceptable in the international standards.
Okay, and you know, it's good that you mentioned about the likes of Netflix. We've got some Kenyan films that have been on Netflix, have already been seen on Netflix, which is a good thing for us. However, you must remember that one of the main challenges we have is financing, be it for SMEs across the board, but even in the film space. So how then could a young filmmaker, or even an established one, because COVID has almost equalized many people, what options do they have right now of accessing finance to be able to, you know, I have this great skill, I've got this great idea, how do I turn it into something that is quality, good enough quality to go on Netflix and the likes?
Yes, first of all, an appreciation that the COVID pandemic hit the world hard. And the film industry or the screen industry was not left behind. Many jobs were cancelled, suspended, or many jobs were lost just like that. For us at the Commission, because of that appreciation of what the industry can be able to do in job creation, branding the country, attracting investment, we have come up with programs that are aimed at supporting productions. So far, we are on our second cycle. There is a program called Empowerment, where we are actually funding programs or projects from filmmakers. All we need is for anyone who has a good project, they have a good business plan, you apply. The current entry call is closing on 18th of December, and you can be able to get as much as 5 million shillings. And this is a grant, it's not a loan.
All right, thank you very much. We would have a lot more to say, but right now we have to hand over to the main event where we are going to be having some of the addresses by the heads of state. Thank you very much, Timothy Owase, the CEO of the Kenya Film Commission. So now I hand you over to Edmond Nyabola to pick it up from there. Edmond. We've had the KFC CEO talking about how various people in his space, that is in the film space, can get financing and in terms of training, because we've seen a lot of content being churned out, for instance, and not all of it may be up to standard. There's the balance of how then do we ensure that the content that's been churned out, because you can do it in as simple a way as using your mobile phone, how can we ensure it gets the the required quality standard? So that's one of the things. We also have different elements that have been discussed here. Like when we talk about growth, are we looking about growth in a holistic way, or is it just growth in terms of the bottom line? There are some organizations who will be speaking to the Oxfam country manager not too long to just tell us about what they feel about the holistic approach towards growth. Is it just about the products and the process, or is it also about the people? Because we are seeing cases where, for instance, we have the doctors, the frontline workers who are battling this pandemic inside the battlefield, and they feel, and they have been complaining that they're not being done justice in as far as the benefits and the protection that is needed by the employer, and that is the government. And so these are some of the elements, because like was said during Edmond's session in the morning earlier on, we may have all this equipment, we may have the beds, the ventilators, but if there's no human resource that is deployed there and is able and qualified to manage and to operate those facilities, then they just become like props. They become dead stock, and that is lost revenue for the country. At a time when we are already seeing that the government wants to is actually reversing some of the tax measures that are taken to ease the burden of the pandemic. That was by the VAT reduction, by income tax reduction. So from January, we'll be going back to that, and now you can imagine what a burden it is for many, because the CS for the National Treasury, that's Ukur Yatani, said that it's going to have made the government lose up to 65 billion shillings worth of revenue that would have been collected had these measures not been taken. And you think about the corruption that's in the country, you could almost see how much of that you can actually, we could have actually have saved. It means that if that money was not being stolen, then possibly it would have actually gone into better use. And so just to understand, like I said, the holistic aspect of it, I want to invite John Kitui, who is the country manager. Just come and join me here of Oxfam. Thank you very much for joining us. Maybe you could just tell us, just when we talk about growth, there's a lot of focus on bottom line in terms of, we're talking about numbers, the statistics, but we at times don't think of the people as much. How then should the balance be for government and leadership of different organizations?
I think when you look at the SDGs, or the African Agenda 2063, I think it's very inclusive. It captures both economic growth, it captures the people aspect, it captures also the environmental sustainability. But I think when you look at most of the conversations, they are more focused on the economy, they are more focused on growth and profit, and they leave people out and they leave the planet out. And I think for us, when you look at the COVID-19 has exposed the inequality that is existing in society, that is actually amplified. It has made that more than 500 people may go into poverty because of that. So I think for me, this forum is a good opportunity to bring the people aspect, the environmental aspect as well, alongside the conversations about how we can develop as a continent. As you've mentioned, from an economic perspective, Africa loses almost $88.6 billion a year through illicit financial flows out of the continent. And at the same time, we get, according to UNCTAD, about 75 billion, both in official development aid or foreign direct investment. So actually, if we kept all these leakages of resources off the continent, then we should be able to have enough resources that we will not need aid. And I think for me, the ideas that should come from the Kusi Ideas Festival should be, how do we tame the illicit flows of resources off the continent? As well, you look at the extractive industries. I think for me, the extractive industry is really colonized. And I think as Africans, we need to find ways to decolonize the extractive industries. There's a lot of smuggling of minerals of the continent. There's a lot of under-invoicing, for example. And these minerals are being used to make batteries, for example, cobalt and manganese for the renewable energy as we shift from sustainable energy. Can we add value to these minerals on the continent? Can we create jobs? Can we realize this demographic dividend of young people by making sure that we are adding value to the resources that are on this continent? So I think the ideas we need to take forward is how we bring people at the same table with the planet and economic growth from a very development perspective, as opposed to just talking about growth and growth and growth.
Okay. And I think that brings a good point where we need to think about, for instance, when you're given the COVID-19 infection, recovery, death numbers, to some they just appear as numbers. We even call them cases, despite the WHO saying we should not do that because it adds to the stigma. So that we can see, if we hear that 1,000 people have been infected, we don't see them as 1,000 cases. We see them as 1,000 people. And the repercussions in terms of how many families are affected is a bigger deal. So where is the balance between saying that, the government, we have to look at, either way, the planning, the government and the advisors and all across the board, even the private sector, need to figure out how to plan. So what balance should they have with saying, ultimately, we may talk about people, but there's product and process, which would still cost, because you find at a point, companies say some things you can't go below in terms of the products and the processes, so you begin retrenching, which has happened quite a bit in the past number of months on account of COVID. So what's the balance? Because we want to prioritize people, but also the processes. If the processes are not there, what do the people do?
I think the other element is about how to resource this. I think we have enough wealth in Africa and in Kenya to meet our needs on the people aspect. So Oxfam published the commitment to reducing inequality report that looked at how much the governments invest in, for example, progressive expenditure, investment in social protection, in education, and in health, looked at things like labor rights and fair wages, looked at aspects like progressive taxation, so we're not taxing the poor more and leaving the rich to expropriate the value they create on the continent. We have enough resources to resource that. When you look at the leakages also through corruption, for example, we can save a lot of money by tackling corruption. So we have enough resources as countries to actually invest on the people, on the people aspect as well. And I think as Oxfam, we're also working with the government, for example, currently as a response to COVID-19 to do cash transfers to households. The government should create systems to ensure that the social protection systems work. And we're working with the ministries to make sure that we have a central registry that people can actually benefit from social protection. So we have enough resources to finance that. And I think, as I've already mentioned, we can also mobilize a lot of domestic resources by just plugging the illicit financial flows, whether it's through capital flight off the continent to tax havens, for example, the double taxation agreements we have with countries like Mauritius, and we are signing more. And they just remove value from the continent, out of the continent. And I think for me, that's probably a top priority of some of the ideas that the government can take on board.
Okay, it's a very difficult time when it comes to trying to balance what you've raised, the inequalities. We've seen the inequalities that are there, and you've said COVID has really amplified them, because let's use an example of education. We have the two ends, those who are able to say that, my child is not going back to school in January. I will figure out whether it's homeschooling or otherwise. Then there are those on the other end who are like, can my children go to school now? Because one, I have no other way of getting them to learn. So you could take the risk, or some of the children end up being victims of different kinds of violence and abuse. So then again, how do we strike that balance? Because now you still want these children to be at par somehow.
So I can talk about myself. So if it was not for equal access to education, I'll probably be within the cycle of poverty. And I think that can be said of many, many Kenyans who've broken through the cycle of poverty through investment in education. And we live in a world now, especially through privatization of education, that the poor will continue being poor because they are having access to poor education. So I think the inequality, we are going to see that inequality increase. The government is proposing to increase, for example, school fees for university students to be at the level of private universities. I think that's going to even worsen inequality. So we are basically just saying that in this country, education is for the rich, and if you are a poor person, you have no access to education. I think those are some of the things that I think the government has to think through as well, to make sure that we all have equal access to education, we all have equal access to healthcare, we all have access to equal access to social protection. So that progressive investment into sectors that we know can reduce inequality is very, very key for us to focus on.
Okay, and you mentioned something about corruption, and which is such an unfortunate case. Even in the pandemic, we've seen what we as NTV exposed, the Covid-19 millionaires. We are seeing so much being lost. You're seeing the amount of money that is being lost to corruption. If you look at what Ukuri Atani was saying, 65 billion shillings what we've missed out in terms of revenue by reducing these measures. Do you feel that if we were to actually deal with the corruption issue, would actually have a lower cost of living in terms of, would the government then say we will reduce, or it will be let's maintain it there and develop more? What do you think would be the best way to go?
So I think with corruption, we've, as a country, we've institutionalized it. And if, as you say, if we manage to address corruption, then we're able to mobilize a lot of domestic resources by plugging some of those leakages. The hope we had by the Constitution of 2010 was the citizen participation. And I think for me, I would say that has not worked very, very well. It's the citizens who should rise up and fight corruption. If the citizens do not organize and stand up and demand accountability from the leaders, corruption will continue. In developed societies, if corruption that happened, for example, from KEMSA, or some heads have to roll, including the heads of ministers. In this country, corruption happens, and we move on as business as usual, and we form committees to investigate that, and then the reports will be shelved. And as we're talking about that, more corruption is happening. So I think the challenge is really to citizens to wake up and demand accountability from leaders, and to be at the forefront of fighting corruption, to demand information, to be involved through citizen participation forums that are there, for example, in budgeting as well, reviewing the general auditor's reports as well, and just holding leaders both at the national level and at the county level and at the community level for the resources that have been put to sectors like the health, for sectors like education, for sectors like social protection as well. It has to be the Kenyans who are taking the leadership, the citizens themselves who are taking that leadership to fight corruption. There is no political will, and I think the only way we can manufacture political will is if we make it politically costly if someone engages in corruption. In this country, it's not yet politically costly. And I think for me, that's where citizens have to move the debate around.
When you say politically costly, for instance, what would be the case? What's an example of explaining what politically costly would mean?
So, for example, we look at beneficiaries of corruption using those proceeds from corruption to get political position. So in Kenya is a country where you hold a public office, and in that public office you manage to engage in corrupt tenders and everything else, and then you use that money and people will vote you on into political positions as well. And I think probably it's a value system. Our political is just a sample of who the Kenyans are. So I think the key thing that we have to, as Kenyans, actually agree is that if you are engaged in corruption as an individual, then you are unsuitable to hold public office. And as much as that is in the Constitution, there's no political will again to implement it. And I think for me that's where we need to move, in the sense that any corrupt individuals or people who've not been cleared of any corruption allegations should not hold public office, should not run for any public office. Unless that happens, then it's going to be business as usual.
Because ultimately, like you say, the point here is not so much, even when they speak about political change, one of the concerns, not political change, I beg your pardon, we talk about constitutional change. One of the concerns that has been raised is that the constitution in itself may not be the problem. The challenge may be the implementation, and especially for the agencies that are expected to implement and to be very, let's say, brutal about it. So I mean, what for you who also you also deal with the people who are in the far-flung areas, and the common one, if we put it that way. How then, because they may start feeling some sense of hopelessness, how then do they get hope amid all this?
I think the only hope has to be that the Constitution is made by the people for the people. So when you look at the Constitution determines how we want to govern ourselves as citizens. And I think the Constitution we have currently is a very, very good one. The challenge we have with implementation is a political one. So there is no political will to implement, for example, the two-thirds gender rule. And even when we implement it, I think accusations have been made that people nominate their girlfriends and to sit on those parliaments. So it's really a win for one woman. It's a loss for feminism, because basically people who are there are not representing the views or the interest of women to that extent. So I think the aspect of constitutionalism is a struggle that will continue, but I think for me the political will to implement the Constitution is not there, and I think for me that's my appeal, is to citizens themselves through civil organizations, civil protest, to make sure that the constitutionalism happens. If it doesn't happen, I think the only hope we have is for the young people. Currently, every town you go to, there's a lot of universities. We are churning out graduates, people having masters, but they have no jobs. It's going to reach a point where young people are going to say, this country cannot continue like that. And I think for me, my only hope is that young people who are educated, who are very, very qualified, who have the knowledge to do things, will be the people who will rise up and challenge and make sure that constitutionalism actually works. Sometimes I'm very disillusioned, especially with the middle class in Kenya, because I think the middle class in Kenya is addicted to the payslip. People rely on the payslip basically to survive, and everyone is just basically a payslip away from poverty. You look at the job losses we've experienced with Covid-19. People lost their jobs, and all of a sudden the mortgages were calling, the banks were calling, and people all of a sudden are becoming poor. So the middle class is not going to be the solution of this country because of the addiction to the payslip. They want a safety, the safety of a peaceful country and everything else. But the young people who are being educated, who are growing up and they have qualified for jobs, will reach a point and they'll say no. And that's already happening. So when you look at on the digital space, all the protests that are going on, they're led by young people. When you look at the informal settlements, the young people are organizing and they're starting up against inequality. And I think for me, the young people are our hope, in that they will reach a point where they'll say enough is enough and it will have to change. And I think politicians will have to listen. And I think ideology will come back into our politics. So it's no longer about a few tribes organizing themselves and then winning elections, but it will be about ideology. It will be how do we create jobs? How do we reduce inequality? How do we reduce violence against women? And those are the things that will matter in the near future. Okay,
and you'd mentioned that as Oxfam you are helping with the cash transfers in regards to those who are the vulnerable groups. Maybe you could tell us, this one, just for clarity, is it one that you've partnered with the government, or is it on your own as an Oxfam project on its own? Then how many people have benefited from this and how much do they get and how often?
So we are in partnership with government. So we're working very closely with the government. The cash transfers for the COVID-19 are focused mainly on the informal settlements in urban areas, both in Nairobi and Mombasa. And they're mainly supported by the European Union, the Danish government, and the German governments as well. And some of the key beneficiaries have been the people who are very most affected by COVID-19. So women who have suffered violence as a result of COVID-19. And I think especially if you go to informal settlements, the coping capacity is not very strong there. The government has a very good cash transfer program, or social protection program for that matter, that targets people living with disabilities, or the elderly persons, or people who are going through some economic crisis. So Oxfam is complementing that. We're working with the government on this single registry element, but as we do that, we're working with other partners as well to support some of these beneficiaries. So for example, we are supporting with about 10,000 households, and each gets about 7,000 shillings per month, and it's through the M-Pesa platform, so it's just money that goes into their M-Pesa platform, and it's helping households to survive in these times. And I think for me, that's why I'm saying that I think as governments, we're trying to work with the government to see how do we make sure that this social protection really is formalized, is organized, is run by the government itself through taxation, and it's well financed. Because when you look at all developed countries, they have social protection systems. People who've lost jobs, people who are going through hard economic times, or elderly persons, people living with severe disabilities, they do not live in fear of what will happen tomorrow. They, as a society, society, we come together and determine that this is a social problem, and we come up with a social solution to that as well. You and I are going to be old at some point. We don't want to age worrying about our pensions, and especially if you've been saving 200 through NSSF, when you're getting old, when you look at the purchasing power parity in 2060 or 2070, it will be very, very little. So a strong social protection system is a very key pillar, and as Oxfam, we are working with the government to see how we strengthen the social protection as well. Also working with the government to see how to make sure that there's increased investment in other progressive sectors that are fighting inequality, like education and health.
Okay, and so how much in total have you disbursed? You said it's 7,000 shillings a month for about 10,000 households. For how many months have you been doing this? Is it from April, May? Just to get a context.
So we've started with the cash transfers we started doing in April. Immediately COVID-19 came in. So when COVID-19 was declared, what happened was there was a huge focus on the health aspect, and so Oxfam and a few partners decided to do the economic response. And so we started in April, but it's been evolutionary. So we've been bringing in a few donors on board, and it's continued. And as we talk now, it's continuing, and we're looking at it ending in December. But as Oxfam, we're still mobilizing resources to make sure that it continues to cushion people until the economy actually recovers and people are able to go back to work.
Okay, and maybe just even before we move on to something else, to a different part of this whole session, my question is, what for you when you go to those households, for yourself and your team, the households that you deal with, who you're helping to give the cash transfers to and just supporting them generally, what for them is the most important thing? Because there's been the argument of, one, are we misprioritizing, being very political at the moment, or what for them, from what your experience, is their most pertinent need at this time?
I think the people who've experienced especially the negative economic impact of COVID-19 at household, for them is survival, is how do we eat today? How do we survive today? How do we buy water today? That's the immediate concern that people have. The second element is their dignity as well. So when you look at women who've gone through violence, or whether it's gender-based violence or sexual violence as well, is how do you get support in a very dignifying way. The thing that I'm very happy with the cash transfers program through M-Pesa is it's aiding with dignity. So you don't have to be paraded and then be given a packet of flour and soap and then be taken pictures and then posted on social media. No, it's support that someone gives you in a very dignifying way. And I think we are pushing even politicians to stop giving people things in public and look at how to support a social protection system that actually works. Instead of being more charitable, we need to focus on the systems as well. So I think for me is the survival element, but also the dignity element. As we find ways to live with COVID, I think the other top priority now is how do we recover from COVID-19? How do we support the people who've lost their businesses? So the mamambogas, the person who was running M-Pesa, the people who was running saloons and they couldn't do it, or the kinyozi, or the boys whose machines were taken because they couldn't pay rent for some of the studios they were running, or movie shops. How do we support these young people to recover from their businesses? How do we support these women who are doing their businesses to recover from it? And as Oxfam, we are discussing with our partners in terms of how to support that recovery. And I think for me as government as well, has a very key role to play in facilitating, especially the small entrepreneurs.
Okay, we'll come and break that down in a bit. But first, I just want us to see a certain clip that is from Oxfam, just giving a better idea and context of what exactly Oxfam does, and especially now in the context of the Kusi Ideas Festival theme, which is towards a post-COVID Africa. Here it is.
Ushuru huwa nalipa kanjo, huwa anakuja every Monday and Thursday.
Ukiniona hivi niko na bidhaa ambaye ninauza imetakisiwa tayari.
Hizo pesa zenye tunalipa ushuru zinakujanga kwetu, hata kama ni indirect zinakuja kwa services, tunapatiwa services na county.
For those corporate who doesn't pay the tax, I will urge them to make sure they pay in order for the government to facilitate service to the people.
Wakati hao wanakataa kulipa ushuru, wanafungia watoto wadogo kupata shule mzuri, hospitali, barabara na hiyo maendeleo ingine.
Lakini ni vizuri KRA ingekuja kuelezea watu, kufundisha watu hizi pesa venye zinalipwa na warahisishe.
So you see what Oxfam does and the kind of benefits they get, and like we're speaking with the country manager for Oxfam Kenya, that is John Kitui, just understanding how the mwananchi at the bottom of the scale, so to speak, is actually being supported to ensure that they have dignity, like he said, they have some sense of livelihood. It's a survival time for many people, and so providing that safety net, may I put it that way. So, Dr. Kitui, you actually mentioned about how you're helping, like even the small businesses. We've got small businesses that some had to shut down altogether. So what kind of, maybe in specifics, help are you giving, or are you providing, or linking them to ensure that they can have a sustainable way forward, especially in this time of recovery?
So we are currently thinking about the support we can give from a recovery perspective to some of the households we've been supporting, the cash transfers in this phase. To be sincere, this will be very speculative because I think some of the ideas that are still coming up have not been concretized. I think one element is actually continued cash transfers to households. So when you look at some of these small businesses, they have already ideas. They don't want someone to come and tell them this, do this and this. They have business ideas. They want just to continue selling their vegetables, and continued cash transfers will help those households use some of that investment to start to revive their own businesses or to reinvent themselves and focus on new business areas. So I think the availability of financial services is a very critical element, and it's a challenge to especially the private sector to make it easier for smaller businesses to have access to safe loans that are not very, very costly. People are afraid of taking loans. People are afraid of going to financial institutions because it can be catastrophic from a life perspective. You can end up losing everything you have, of everything in the house auctioned. How do we come with financial solutions that are very tailored to this household? To these households and small businesses as well. I think for me the financial aspect is very key. When you talk about sustainability and resilience, I think as Kenyans we need to adopt insurance more, and I think for me the insurance companies also have to come up with products that are suited to small businesses. So when you look at all these small businesses, most of them are not insured. So when they lost everything, they may not recover. Big businesses that were insured are in very safe hands, unless probably the insurance companies don't cover COVID, but they can go back and claim some of the capital, and then they can use that compensation to restart their businesses. And I think for me the small and medium enterprises lack that insurance facility to facilitate them to bounce back after such shocks. And I think that's the insurance element is important because when you look at where the world is going with the climate change mainly, we're going to see more shocks. We're going to see more crises happen, and not just singly, but in multiple. So for example, now we see COVID-19 coming on top of the floods that we've experienced in part of Kenya and droughts as well, and now COVID-19 as well. It's a very complex environment, and these shocks are going to continue. Pandemics are going to continue, imposing on top of each other. So adoption of insurance and having products of insurance that cushion people so that they can bounce back when shocks come is equally very, very important.
Okay, and you mentioned about encouraging people to not just be addicted to the pay slip, so to speak. So that goes in the line of, we have been having a lot of, let me call them heroic stories about entrepreneurship, for instance. But the truth is not everyone is cut out for entrepreneurship. So what's the balance, in terms of when we preach this, let me call it gospel of earnings, what's the balance of saying you go to school, everyone should be an entrepreneur, but not everyone is cut out for it?
I think you're using entrepreneurship in a very economical sense. I think entrepreneurship does not mean basically doing business. I think when you look at people who call themselves entrepreneurs in Kenya, mainly they're business people who are traders, who trade things. Entrepreneurship can apply to agriculture sector, for example. Entrepreneurship can apply for people who work in the service sectors, people working for non-governmental organizations. Everyone is entrepreneurial in the roles that they play. And I think for me, it's the ability to come up with solutions for the problems that exist. And I think for me, that's probably the most important thing, as opposed to just mere businesses. And how do we build skills for entrepreneurship for people so that people can adapt from one market to another? So you're not just, if your kinyozi is closed and you are lost. No, that you can use those entrepreneurial skills to think of another solution for the problem. Africa has plenty of problems, and I think for me, all those problems are very good opportunities for solutions. When you look at Africa, we are exporting a lot of our minerals in raw form. Why don't we add value here? We are talking about doing solar energy and shifting from fossil fuels, for example. How can we start making the solar cells here on the continent? We are importing most of this technology away, and that is value lost on this continent. What our university is doing, actually, sometimes I always wonder, why don't we train our university students to come up and think about energy problems and energy solutions? So I think for me, entrepreneurship should be seen in that light, that people can reinvent themselves, they can look at the current problems and come up with solutions, as opposed to graduating and then looking for jobs.
Okay, and when you have such huge conferences of significant value, how then do we strike the balance of ensuring that whatever is discussed at these high-level discussions actually trickles down to the common Mwananchi? Because many of the times we'll have such functions, some will figure out, some may say it's a talk shop, you know, if the big boys and big girls, they put it that way, have come and they have, they've come and they've discussed some nice things. They sound very flowery, some are jargonistic to the common Mwananchi. How then do we ensure that some of these discussions at such fora can then now trickle down and actually show tangible effect and impact and benefit to the common Mwananchi?
I think a lot lies especially with governments. When you look at why Kenya we devolved governance to the counties, is because we wanted to bring the citizen participation closer to some of these decisions. So there's a lot of responsibility that falls on the government to make sure that ideas discussed in such places are translated to practice at the county level. So that's not happening very well, and that's why we attend all these meetings. We talk about decolonizing aid and creating spaces for entrepreneurship, but that does not translate into reality. So I think for me, the local county governments play a very, very key role to make sure that citizens participate into it.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just thinking about how it's a time when we could actually think about the young people, for instance. The arts have really picked up, you know. They were picking up even more then now the pandemic hit, then people started adapting. So the arts is one of the areas we've seen people adapting in terms of trying to reinvent themselves, you know. But again, financing becomes a key problem. Even now when, you know, some of the benefits that were there sort of being reversed, you know. How then do we ensure it's, you know, it's a sustainable recovery and not, because, for instance, if someone had been enjoying the benefit of the income tax cuts, then when they go back to their workplace, they still are on the, you know, the salary cut. It means that net they're actually earning much less than even when we were in the heart of the pandemic, from the time the measures were made. How then do we have a sustainable way forward?
So I think the first one is to challenge the government to continue with the economic measures they put in place to cushion citizens. So, for example, the tax cut, I think it's too early to reverse those taxes, and I think I've seen in the papers today that the government intends to reverse that. To be sincere, I think we are not even at the peak of the pandemic yet in Africa. I think, as Professor Rogo has said, the pandemic is still coming. It started in Asia, it went to Europe and the US, and it's just coming in Africa. And we've put good measures of public health, but our pandemic is yet to come. It's not the best time for the government to remove the cushion they had put in place to cushion citizens. So I think for me, those measures have to continue. There is an element of also, I think it's just solidarity with others. I think as Kenyans, we have to stand up in solidarity with others, both within the country, but also internationally as well. I think there's very good global solidarity when you look at the West in terms of supporting developing countries as well. But there is an element that I think government have to implement the continue to cash transfers programs for people, especially in urban informal settlements or rural areas who've lost their source of income. That has to continue until we reach a time where we think the economy has recovered well enough to remove those cushions that we've put in place.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. John Kitui, who is the country manager of Oxfam Kenya. A lot of insight you've given us. Thank you very much. As much as the sun is...
It's been very, very hot.
Yeah, the sun is making us lose weight. We are melting away. So that we don't melt away extremely beyond what we need to. It's good for weight loss, though. I'll be handing you over to Smriti Vidyathi, who's going to be picking up a different conversation, and we'll also be having conversation, just listening to the Nation Media Group chairman, Dr. Wilfred Kiboro. So I hand you over to Smriti. Smriti, over to you.
Dan, thanks very much. And if you have just joined us, you are watching the Kusi Ideas Festival, coming to you live from the great Kisumu County here at the lakeside. It's been a great day so far. Do stay tuned and remember the conversation continues online. Hashtag is KusiFest 2020. Well, at this point, I would like to invite the chairman of the Nation Media Group, that is Dr. Wilfred Kiboro, to give his remarks related to this Kusi Ideas Festival. Over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning. On behalf of Nation Media Group, it's my pleasant duty to welcome all the guests, delegates, and participants assembled in the lakeside city of Kisumu and from across Africa who have registered and dialed in to the second Kusi 2 Festival of Ideas. It is our pleasure to have you on board. The first Kusi Festival was held in Kigali, in Rwanda, exactly a year ago. And we are very delighted that President Paul Kagame, who was our generous host last year, will also be addressing the festival shortly via video link. We are very grateful for his continued support and interest in what we are doing or trying to do for Africa. Thank you so much, Mr. President. We are also very happy and grateful to His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta. Despite being in the middle of a very busy and exciting political season in our country, we'll also be addressing us through a video link and for having the time to be with us. Asante sana Mheshimiwa Rais. I would also like to recognize and thank the Right Honorable Raila Odinga, who was with us during Kusi 1 in Kigali. I'm very happy that he's with us today and will also be addressing us shortly. I want to thank him most sincerely for his continued interest and unwavering support for our efforts. Allow me to also recognize and thank our generous host, the Governor of Kisumu County, Professor Nyamnyong, for graciously hosting this festival despite the many challenges from the COVID-19. Peter, thank you so much. During the Kusi 1 in Kigali, we had a very thoughtful and exciting conversations on how Africa would look like in the next 60 years. We sought to understand, among other things, why Africa, which is the richest continent in terms of natural and human resources, is the poorest in terms of living standards, and what we can do about that. Kusi 2 Festival of Ideas is a continuation of those conversations and those deliberations that are aimed at shaping our continent in the years to come. As organizers and conveners of this festival, we had many ideas about how to structure Kusi 2 in order to take the ideas that came from Kusi 1 forward and to translate them into tangible actions. But like everybody else, we didn't foresee that coronavirus would cause one of the greatest social, health, and economic upheavals in the world in nearly 100 years. At some point, we are not even sure whether Kusi 2 would take place, given all the travel restrictions and other challenges brought about by COVID-19. But I'm very, very happy that we are going ahead with Kusi 2 despite all these challenges. When COVID-19 struck at the beginning of this year, the Afro-pessimists apocalyptically predicted that the virus would wipe out most of the African population due to lack of adequate health facilities, equipment, financial resources, protective gear, and health personnel to cope with the pandemic, among other challenges. The latest statistics, ladies and gentlemen, indicate that globally, over 68 million cases of COVID-19 cases have been reported with over 1.5 million deaths, most of them from Asia, Europe, South and North America. Africa, on the other hand, with a population of more than 1 billion people, has less than 2.5 million reported cases and less than 60,000 reported deaths from the virus. While recognizing that the threat from the virus is still with us and we must continue to fight its spread by adhering to all the health protocols, the worst of what was predicted about Africa did not happen. By and large, Africa has fared better than the rest of the world, and there are experts who have spoken about that and will continue to do so. What did we do right to avoid the apocalyptic predictions? Ladies and gentlemen, the response to COVID-19 in most African countries has been spectacular. In January this year, when the pandemic broke, apart from maybe South Africa, no other African country had laboratories that could test for the virus. But by February, 3 had, and today, all of them do, with Nigeria leading the pack with 8 laboratories with the capacity to test the virus. Most of the personal protective equipment, PPEs, including masks and the sanitizers, were imported. Today, most of the countries are able to produce their own PPEs and sanitizers in addition to other equipment, and a sharp increase in isolation bed capacities and ICU units. Ladies and gentlemen, among all the pain and disruption we have gone through because of COVID-19, our response is telling us something wonderful about ourselves as Africans. It tells us about our resilience and creativity. It tells us that with courage, determination, creativity, and utilizing the innovative minds of our youth, Africa can make a quantum leap in all spheres of development in the 21st century and take our continent to the next level and take her place in her rightful place among the developed nations. But most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, it reinforces what came out very clearly from Kusi 1 deliberations, that Africa does not need to rely on or look east or west to find solutions to our problems. Solutions are right here with us. I have no doubt in my mind that Africa will come out of this pandemic, but we are not out of the woods yet. In the words of His Highness the Aga Khan, the founder of Nation Media Group, he tells us that the key to overcoming this crisis resides in our collaborative actions and responses. And it is by learning from each other that we will address the issues at hand in the most efficient way and build a stronger post-COVID-19 world. Kusi 2, ladies and gentlemen, is providing that forum. I want to conclude my remarks by asking all of us here present who are participating in this event to seize the opportunity that Kusi 2 has provided to share important lessons and the pandemic has taught us, in addition to continuing with the conversation we started in Kigali a year ago on where we want to position Africa among the community of nations in the 21st century. In this conversation, it is my humble submission, ladies and gentlemen, that our youth, who constitute a significant majority of our population, need to be at the center stage. I thank you all and look forward to an enjoyable 2 days of sharing ideas and experiences that I'm sure will contribute greatly to shaping Africans' fortunes and destiny in the 21st century. Asanteni sana. Asanteni sana.
Dr. Wilfred Kiboro, the chairman of the Nation Media Group, thank you so much for joining us and being part of this Kusi Ideas Festival here in Kisumu, but we appreciate you joining us virtually. It's great to have you with us. At this point, I would now like to invite Dr. Azim Lakhani. He is the AKDN representative, that is the Aga Khan Development Network. He joins us live here in person. Dr. Lakhani, welcome to the podium. Let's give him a round of applause.
Your Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, President of the Republic of Kenya, Your Excellency Paul Kagame, President of the Republic of Rwanda, Right Honorable Raila Odinga, High Representative for Infrastructure Development in Africa, African Union, Your Excellency, Professor Anyang Nyong, Governor of the County of Kisumu, Dr. Wilfred Kiboro, Chairman of the Board of the Nation Media Group, distinguished guests, and our distinguished audience joining us virtually. Good afternoon. On behalf of the Aga Khan Development Network, the AKDN, I would like to congratulate the Nation Media Group on holding the second edition of the Kusi Ideas Festival in these unprecedented times and under the most challenging of circumstances. NMG's resilience, flexibility, and ability to adapt to the COVID-19 pandemic is reflective of the capacity of AKDN agencies, of which NMG is one, to respond to crises beyond immediate interventions. In a space of just 9 months, the way of life of virtually the whole of humankind has changed. SARS-CoV-2 respects no geographic, gender, ethnic, or religious boundaries, and dealing with it has required coordinated efforts between the government, private sector, civil society, and individuals. Addressing complex issues in healthcare, education, and certainly during a pandemic requires enormous resources, and the AKDN has a tradition of working with partners with mutual interests to produce mutually beneficial outcomes that improve the quality of life. This has been evident in our response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The AKDN has been working with its partners, governments, development banks, diplomatic donor agencies, and numerous organizations at international and national levels to provide short and long-term strategic support to mitigate the damaging consequences of the pandemic. During the festival, you will likely hear about some remarkable organizations and individuals that have responded to the challenges arising from the pandemic with innovation, creativity, tenacity, and ingenuity. Our own experience at AKDN includes examples of wide-scale adaptation by our agencies in multiple sectors to transform their business and programmatic models in reaction to the pandemic. To give you some examples, the Aga Khan Health Services and the Aga Khan University Hospital in Nairobi, Kenya, have supported governments through the provision of isolation facilities, additional intensive care beds, COVID-19 testing, and personal protective equipment. The AKDN also provided training to thousands of doctors, nurses, and healthcare workers in management and care protocols for COVID-positive patients. Recently, the Aga Khan University and the Aga Khan Health Services in Kenya and Tanzania received a grant of 6 million euros from KfW, Germany's state-owned development bank, towards the purchase of PPE for health workers, plus COVID-19 test kits. Part of the grant will also fund a patient welfare program for COVID-19 patients. Our media and educational institutions responded to and embraced the digital transformation that has taken place on a global scale. NMG launched its digital brand, Nation.Africa, and transformed its thought leadership series, the Nation Leadership Forum, into a digital platform. The Aga Khan Education Service and the university developed online curricula for distance learning, and the training of thousands of health workers using mobile technology. And in the finance sector, the Diamond Trust Bank provided fast-tracked financial relief and a swift transition to cashless and online banking for thousands of its clients. DTB has also signed an agreement with the International Finance Corporation for $50 million US, a loan, a part of the IFC's fast-track Covid-19 global facility, to enable the bank to continue supporting small and medium enterprise clients. In the public domain, the university is working with globally renowned partners for a rapid response in vaccine development, drug trials, and research to improve care and management of COVID-19 patients. And the Aga Khan Foundation, working with its partners, leveraged its extensive network of nearly 2,000 civil society organizations to educate communities through online content on COVID-19 prevention measures. The foundation also trained community groups to produce PPE and provided food relief to thousands of vulnerable families and their communities. Founded by His Highness the Aga Khan, Imam or spiritual leader of the Shia Ismaili Muslims, the AKDN has a presence in over 30 countries globally, with its agencies operating in 14 African countries in the sectors of education, health, finance, media, culture, tourism, and industry for nearly 100 years. As we anticipate a wide-scale rollout of COVID-19 vaccines and a hopeful return to a safer, albeit much-changed world, the AKDN will continue to work with its multi-level partners to prepare for a post-COVID future from a position of sustainability and strength. We will continue to support Africa's people and their development to engender self-reliance and improvement in quality of life. All of this underpinned by the AKDN's strong ethics and values, including compassion, concern for vulnerable people, generosity, and excellence. Thank you.
Dr. Lakhani, thank you so much for your contribution, and we always do appreciate the support from the Aga Khan Development Network and also the Aga Khan Foundation. Thank you once again. All right, well, we are, of course, in the great lakeside city of Kisumu County, and to welcome us to this great county, I would now like to invite Honorable John Olago Aluoch. He is the MP for Kisumu West. Karibu sana. Let's give him a welcome.
Thank you very much. Vidyarthi, I'm actually welcoming them to Kisumu West constituency where we are. I believe His Excellency Governor Nyong'o will welcome everybody to our great county of Kisumu. My name is Olago Aluoch, Member of Parliament, Kisumu West, and where we are is in the center of the constituency. I take opportunity to welcome all of you here today, and I want to, with humility, also introduce my colleague, Senator Nyamunga, who is down here, Rose Nyamunga. Thank you, Mheshimiwa. And since this conference is partially virtual and partially physical, I want to address His Excellencies the Presidents, His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta and Paul Kagame, His Excellency our Governor, Paul Nyong'o. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to be here with you today to discuss this very, very serious issue post-COVID recovery. Those of us who are familiar with Kusi Ideas Festival will by now know that Kusi is a southerly Indian Ocean trade wind that connected Asia and East Africa during the early days. But not many of you may know that on Lake Victoria that connects our countries in East Africa, we have a similar trade wind, but it is called Kusi. Kusi is the trade wind that in the morning blows from Kisumu port into the lake towards Tanzania and Uganda. In the evening, it blows the other way around into Kisumu. I don't know what coincidence it is, but I'm glad to be participating at this Kusi Festival. Ladies and gentlemen, when we listened to our panelists this morning, Dr. Rashid Aman, very well known to Kenyans, always has a way of delivering his messages about COVID in a way that restores hope and gives us confidence. When he spoke, I felt relieved and I saw that there's a silver lining on the COVID pandemic, and the silver lining is that our health system will be improved and well equipped, and post-COVID, you will be more prepared for anything else that may come our way. But that confidence was soon shattered when I listened to my good friend, Professor Kamarogo. And many people asked me, who is Professor Kamarogo? I know Professor Nyong'o will introduce Kamarogo very well, but I've known him since we were young people. We went to school together. He was older than me. But not many of you know that Professor Kamarogo spent half his working life, about 30 years, working for WHO outside our country. He has just retired. Professor Nyong'o will no doubt tell you that Professor Kamarogo is the chair of Lake Region COVID-19 Advisory Committee. So I'm proud of our governor having a team in this region that is looking at how best we can come to terms with this pandemic. I want to say, finally, as I welcome ladies and gentlemen, that Kusi Festival 2020 couldn't have come at a better time. A time when we are all focusing our energies and resources towards sustaining the fight against COVID. I'm proud to be part of the team that is looking at this, and with confidence, I welcome you to Kisumu West. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Honorable Aluoch, thank you very much for that warm welcome to Kisumu West in particular. It's a great place, asante sana. I remember at Kusi 1, which took place last year, 2019, yes, in Rwanda, at the close of that Kusi Ideas Festival, Governor Anyang' Nyong'o made it clear that he wanted the next Kusi to take place in Kisumu County. And here we are. We all made it happen. And it is thanks to you, Mr. Governor, that it has happened. So thank you so much and congratulations. At this point, I would like to welcome you to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, here now joining us for these remarks, Professor Anyang' Nyong'o, the Governor of the great county of Kisumu. Karibu sana.
Thank you very much, moderator. Thank you very much, John, for your kind remarks. You're always in your vantage. And let me begin, ladies and gentlemen, by welcoming, of course, our President of the Republic of Kenya, His Excellency Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, and His Excellency, the President of Rwanda, my friend is Paul Kagame, and the African High Commissioner for Infrastructure, and our former Prime Minister, Right Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga, and all the dignitaries, members of the diplomatic corps, and leaders of Kisumu County who are here including a visitor. We have the Deputy Governor of Kiambu, who is also in attendance, Her Excellency Joyce Ngugi. I welcome you to Kisumu County and to this fantastic resort called Ciala, which took the Nation Media Group by surprise. But next time you come, you will find another Bao resort or something to that effect to even add more wonders to what we can achieve in Kisumu. Ladies and gentlemen, this Kusi Ideas Festival taking place here today after we've been welcomed by NMG Chairman, my friend Wilson Kiboro. And I noticed that yesterday we also had the CEO and Steve, sure is still here, my friend Stephen Gitagama. Couldn't have come at a better time. At a time when all of us are looking for something more uplifting, something more reassuring, something that can focus our attention to the future. And that is the fight against COVID-19. As Kamarogo reassured us this morning, and I've seen the graph that they have worked on as our advisors in the Lake Region Economic Bloc, the graph is going to rise exponentially until June next year. And I was scared. I wouldn't use the word that I normally use, but I was scared, seeing that that is the way COVID is likely to go. And as Kamarogo said, this is just a prelude to the deluge. And Kama, I don't want us to be in a pessimistic mood, but as the Americans say, when the going is tough, the tough get going. And we in Kisumu, together with most Kenyans, we feel we are tough enough to get going, to defeat this COVID pandemic, if we do some of the things that the earlier panelists told us. One, the scientific initiative that Dr. Mann told us we must continue with. And two, the usual preventive measures that Kama talked about, which are very important in the fight against COVID. But having said that, something was said this morning which I think is extremely important in the fight against COVID, that we cannot do this if we engage in business as usual, if we do not exploit our innovative potential in using technology and the science that we know to tackle a problem in an African context, in a Kisumu context, in a Kenyan context. And we have seen, indeed, as it was demonstrated this morning, that Kenyans have risen to the occasion when innovation was required. Kama reminded us quite often, we give up on what we innovate to take the already made technologies from somewhere else. I will demonstrate to you this afternoon that that is not what Kusi was about when those sailors sailed from the East African coast to the Asian subcontinent many years ago. Today, when I woke up this morning, I woke up to read an email from my friend Vipul Amin, which is very relevant to what Kusi Ideas Festival is about. Let me just read this email verbatim to you. Dear Prof, greetings. We have designed a cruise ship for operations on Lake Victoria. PFA, the profile of an 89-meter cruise ship with 38 cabins, 84 passengers, and cabin accommodation for 66 marine and hospitality crew. We have also worked out a detailed itinerary of 8 nights to 9-day circuit around Kenyan and Ugandan waters. This schedule provides for 3 trips per month. Look forward to give you a detailed presentation on the same on a day and time convenient to you. Hope to hear from you at the earliest opportunity. With regards, Vipul Amin. Now, I think this is what I call the real spirit of Kusi Ideas Festival, to do something innovative so as to venture into and change the future of Africa, beginning right here in Kisumu, to wake up idle resources and galvanize them for improving the livelihood of our people. Isn't it a shame that this lake, the second largest freshwater lake in the world, has been lying grossly underutilized since 1978, when the East African community collapsed? During exactly the same period, the Chinese woke up from underdevelopment and rose up to be a world power, now dominating international trade, and the Americans are indebted to them. If the Chinese wanted to foreclose American business, they can do it overnight. We, on the other hand, during this period, have sat by when a very useful resource called Lake Victoria is going down with environmental degradation, and ships and boats that sank in the harbor 30 years ago, waiting to be brought to the top. I mean, rather than do that, has been innovative, and has, like the sailors of old that went to Asia with the wind as the only power to propel those boats to Asia, did use technology and science at that point in time to engage in a thriving trade between our coastal cities and Asia. We in Africa, we are not maximizing the use of our natural resources. We are selling them for a song, or they are getting pillaged, where insecurity and political conflicts aid and abet such pillage. In spite of being a continent with the largest natural resources, we are, unfortunately, the poorest in terms of our GDP and our foreign earnings in terms of our exports. The saddest example of this pillage of our continent is the pillage of the rosewood tree in the Senegambia region, the most rare species of valuable hardwood in the world. Chinese companies capitalize on the greed of our politicians and the political conflicts in the Casamance region of Senegal, on the Senegambian border, to pillage this wood to be used in making very valuable furniture in China. The saddest aspect of this is that this wood is then exported from China to Africa to be used by us, the pillaged continent. Another of Idi Amin's ambition is to champion the making of fiberglass boats to replace the wooden canoe, which is no longer viable as a vessel for fishing or transport on the lake. Like in West Africa, the hardwood in Mount Elgon and the Eastern Congo have become rare, making it unavailable for making canoes that have for decades been used on the lake for fishing. The fishermen have hence relied on softwood and iron sheets to make their canoes. When the iron rusts and the softwood ages, the fishing boats or canoes usually sink in great numbers every year, killing the fishermen who lose their catch in the midst of the storms on the wild waves of the lake. If you ask Dr. Ali Said Matano, who is here with us, the Executive Secretary of the East African Community Lake Victoria Basin Commission, he will tell you that we lose about 5,400 fishermen in the whole Lake Victoria every year. 3 times more than the people we lost during the post-election violence in Kenya in 2008. Why am I telling you this story? To underscore the fact that just as COVID-19 has taught us that technology and innovation has been important in mitigating the pandemic, our development in Africa, in terms of improving, protecting, and guaranteeing the lives and livelihoods of our people, must always, now and into the future, be predicated upon science, knowledge, technology, and innovation that is applied in the way we do things. Not science, technology, and innovation that is worshipped for the sake of that, but that is applied in the way we do things to improve the lives and livelihoods of our people. But let me go back a little and visit the predicament of the rosewood tree in Senegambia, where its pillage has been aided and abetted by political conflicts and violence in the Casamance region in the Senegambian border. Democratic, inclusive, and stable political systems is the only safeguard against such violence that destabilizes human livelihood and ravages our environment. Indeed, data shows that the desertification on the Senegambian border and in Gambia, the smallest independent nation in Africa, is as a result of the pillage of the rosewood tree. As a hardwood, it is very difficult for it to grow again once it is cut. Botswana, though a nation of only 2.5 million people, is perhaps the richest nation in Africa, endowed with huge deposits of diamonds and pristine landscape, which he has harnessed very well for our development. But why? Because Botswana, since independence, has had a stable, democratic, and inclusive government, though recently also threatened by politics of exclusivity. In short, we are a rich continent with bad governance, and that bad governance has exposed us to unnecessary loss and abuse of our natural and human resources. It's urgent that we harness our knowledge, our ideas, and aspirations to guarantee the future of this continent. Kama demonstrated that very well. That the reason why we didn't think creatively and innovatively about how to fight COVID is because we thought first and foremost about procuring something. Those sailing ships that relied on mere force of monsoon winds to propel them to and from Asia, as we traded with them, were not constructed simply. I have seen some exhibits in the port of Genoa in Italy, and the technology was not simple, even by modern standards. That was way back 5 or more centuries ago, and these people could sail weeks and weeks across the Indian Ocean and reach their destiny without starvation, without tremendous loss of life. Those technologies and scientists were from this part of Africa. Where did we lose that advancement? Walter Rodney has reminded us that our history is full of underdevelopment initiated from outside Africa by colonialism and imperialism. But we have now been politically independent for half a century, and we must have learned our lessons. So when COVID hits us, 50 years after independence, we should have been able, like the Cubans, to look inside and use our own knowledge, science, and technology to mitigate COVID. I remember when I went to Cuba and went to the Center for Biotechnology and Genetic Engineering, and also went to their Labiofarm, their pharmaceutical company. I was impressed, positively impressed, by the extent to which the Cubans have been able to do research in genetic engineering and biotechnology to produce vaccines, and also to produce pharmaceuticals and other things for Labiofarm. And I was told that before a Cuban child is born, from that vaccine, most of which is made from sugar or products of it, Cuban child is given 7 vaccinations they come into the world armed against viruses and other ravages against life. Cuba started this journey only 2 or 3 years before we were independent. We now rely on our doctors for family medicine, and we rely on Labiopharm if we wanted pharmaceuticals from them. We must recapture our history and build our own future. Here in Kisumu, we say Tichtire, because we believe that work awaits us, and only through work can we produce and make our lives and livelihoods. We say there is work to be done. Let us do it. Mwalimu Julius Nyerere was always exhorting Tanzanians to go to work and do result-oriented work by saying, it can be done. Play your part. I think what Kusi Ideas Festival is telling us that in being optimistic about Africa's future, Africa, Kenya must work for itself. And the work is there, cut for us. Looking for vaccines, we can do it. Let us play our part. Getting proper preventive measures in our community health system and adopting family medicine as a way of doing this, we can do it if we play our part. It is a territory we need to capture and to conquer. And it is for this reason that I would like to congratulate the planners of this festival for coming up with a very fitting theme towards a COVID-19 Africa. No, towards post-COVID-19 Africa, recovering together. Kama did remind us that from the evidence he has and his team, let us not talk of post-COVID yet. Maybe we can revise the theme of this conference by heeding Kama's advice. But still, we can tweak it in the context of how far the discussion has progressed. But why did we choose Kisumu to host this festival? Not only because we were partners with Nation Media Group in Kigali last time, but Kisumu in many ways represent the challenges and the opportunities that Kenya faces today. It is a city at the tip of Lake Victoria that the British many years ago were anxious to reach, so as to reach the inner sanctuaries of Africa. It still remains so. It's a city sitting on a lake that has been dominant for so many years, that needs to be awakened so that it can be part and parcel of the awakening in Africa, and to resume maritime trade and maritime transport on the lake to link the harbors around the lake that were once part of the East African railways and harbors. And therefore, Kisumu is indeed a typical city for having a discourse on the regeneration of ideas that can propel us into the future, like those monsoon winds propelled those ships to Asia and back to make the Eastern African coast prosperous with thriving cities that are known in history. Kisumu, too, is the headquarters of the Lake Region Economic Bloc, an example that when we come together, we can do something great. Unity is strength. Determination is the essence of struggle. We thank, really, our development partners like the Food and Agriculture Organization and the United Nations who have joined us in the Lake region to support some of the innovative projects we have in agriculture as a way of having a resilient economy into the future. The kind of resilience that the Kusi Ideas Festival is calling upon us as we spend 2 days here at this beautiful resort called Siala. I must, at the same time, thank you who have been attending here, that without you are being here to propagate the ideas that will come from here through the newspapers and through personal communication. What we say here can remain here, which really not our intention. But pandemics have come and gone in this world. Millions of people died during the Spanish plague in 1918 to 1920. I hope that we don't reach that proportion of people who died in the Spanish plague. But Europe finally rose from its ashes like a proverbial owl to build one of the most resilient communities of nations we know in our time. And therefore, Africa likewise should be able to accomplish such feat as Europe has done, having come from 2 world wars and plagues and so on, notwithstanding our internal conflict that ravage this continent at the moment, even one in Ethiopia ravaging now. We must indeed, like a proverbial owl, rise from our ashes, responding to the positive message of the Kusi Ideas Festival. I welcome you to this festival. I welcome you to Kisumu. Eat your ngege, which is a delicious meal, very nutritious, but make sure you eat it early so that you don't go with a full stomach to sleep. You may dream very bad dreams, which I don't wish you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Kisumu.
Professor Anyang' Nyong'o, Governor of Kisumu County, thank you so much for your wise words and insights, for sharing stories that stir feelings of hope and resilience and excitement as well, and for reminding us what it is that we need to do to succeed and how we need to change the way we think and do things. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, the previous speakers have all acknowledged the presence of His Excellency Paul Kagame of Rwanda and also His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, President of the Republic of Kenya. And they are both, in fact, with us. They join us in this forum virtually. So at this point, I would like to invite His Excellency Paul Kagame, President of the Republic of Rwanda, to make his remarks at the Kusi Ideas Festival.
Our host, Governor Anyang' Nyong'o, Chairman and board members, CEO and staff of Nation Media Group, festival partners, dear delegates, let me start by congratulating Nation Media Group for putting together this second edition of the Kusi Ideas Festival in these challenging circumstances. When we met in Kigali last year, no one could have predicted that we would be in the middle of a full-blown global pandemic today. There has been a lot of speculation about why Africa is handling the COVID pandemic better than expected. What really matters is that the lessons we have learned and the solutions we have already applied will help us to recover together. Continued collaboration is key in order to emerge from this period in safety and prosperity. First, COVID notwithstanding, our people still want to travel easily across Africa and connect meaningfully with fellow Africans. We have to make this a reality by staying on track with the African Continental Free Trade Area and everything else we have always aspired to do together. Second, we will only get there if we harness the power of technology. In East Africa, we possess the natural talent to create innovative solutions that will generate wealth for our growing population. We must find new ways to invest in infrastructure, in our people, and in an enabling political and business environment. And finally, in Rwanda, we have learned that progress comes from ensuring participation and inclusivity. In the same way, the excellent ideas put forward by the talented people brought together by Kusi will make a difference. I'm delighted the Kusi continues to be a stimulating and inspiring forum for our region. Please count on Rwanda's support for this homegrown African initiative. I thank you.
Thank you very much for your virtual participation, His Excellency Paul Kagame, the President of Rwanda. And it was actually the support of President Kagame that made Kusi 1 possible. He was the host last year. And now it is my pleasure to invite His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta, the President of Kenya, to make his remarks and also officially open Kusi Ideas Festival 2 here in Kisumu County.
Your Excellency Paul Kagame, President of the Republic of Rwanda, Cabinet Ministers present, Dr. Wilfred Kiboro, Chairman of the Nation Media Group, the Honorable Professor Anyang' Nyong'o, Governor of the County of Kisumu, Your Excellencies, High Commissioners and Ambassadors, business leaders, innovators, researchers, all distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, let me wish you all a very good morning, and thank you very much, Session Chair, for allowing me, first and foremost, to sincerely acknowledge and welcome to Kenya His Excellency President Paul Kagame and all other distinguished guests who have honored our invitation, some of whom are like me, attending this event virtually. Allow me also to congratulate the nation for conceiving and hosting the second year running the Kusi Ideas Festival, and I thank the county government of Kisumu under the leadership of Professor Anyang' Nyong'o for seeing it through. Your Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, as with almost every African country, Kenya's necessary responses to COVID-19 have ensured that the worst forecast for public health did not come to pass in our countries. However, in implementing these public health measures, there has been a resultant slowdown in business and economic activities, which has in turn negatively impacted government revenues, thereby putting pressure on government's overall fiscal position. Across Africa, our response has been well-sequenced and multi-pronged, involving a public health response to contain the spread of the virus and to minimize fatalities, together with a simultaneous adaptation of appropriate monetary policy responses that has eased liquidity constraints as well as solvency risks. The continent has also come up with a very innovative fiscal response that have cushioned the economic impact of the pandemic and helped keep small and medium enterprises in business. With international supply chains severely limited, our enterprises quickly adapted and began producing personal protective equipment, hospital equipment for both local and export markets. This is a lesson that the current situation is not merely a crisis, but one which has provoked nations to rethink and to come up with new innovative ways of building our nations for survival. Fostering agility within our MSME sector will be instrumental in our Build Back Better programs. Regulatory barriers that prevent businesses from rapidly adopting to changing circumstances should be removed, and our enterprises should be encouraged to innovate. At the government level, it is our obligation to lead our nations out of the crisis and into a land of opportunity. To succeed in undertaking this task will, however, require enhanced collaboration with all our development partners, international finance institutions, our private sector, and including our small and medium-sized enterprises. I call on them to provide the necessary resources, and that is especially our international development partners and international financial institutions, to complement those of our governments as we implement our post-COVID-19 recovery plans. Ladies and gentlemen, it must be borne in mind that there cannot be a global bounce back that leaves Africa behind. Our development partners and the international financial institutions should take a long-term view and dispense with any short-term requirements or considerations that would only serve to slow down Africa's economic recovery. Your Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, as a government and in the spirit of Pan-Africanism, it is necessary for us to consider responses that do not just seek to address direct and immediate impacts of COVID-19, but also those that result in wider sustaining of systems for the ultimate well-being of our people. In that regard, my government has swiftly designed the post-COVID-19 economic recovery strategy, together with our county governments, that will help accelerate Kenya's economic recovery and the attainment of higher as well as sustained growth. The ERS will also provide solutions for the mitigation of COVID-19's negative and economic as well as social challenges, while laying the basis for an even more prosperous, just, and equitable Kenya for all. Ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic was bound to affect more seriously the vulnerable part of our populations. Cognizant of this fact, my government moved fast and introduced several welfare measures to cushion our elderly, the urban poor, and vulnerable persons and businesses in our economy. We introduced a 100% tax relief for persons earning a gross monthly income of up to Kenya shillings 24,000. We reduced VAT over the period from 16% to 14%, as well as reduced income tax rate at both personal and corporate levels from 30% to 25%. And even as these short-term reliefs are set to lapse, because they will, my government is on course to introducing longer-lasting comprehensive measures to boost our economy and society post-COVID-19. With the lessons learned from the pandemic in mind, we shall focus on healthcare, promotion of the digital economy, fintech, education, as well as manufacturing. We have also noted the concerns of the media, and we are in the process of exploring ways which their sales and revenues can return to pre-COVID-19 levels. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude, I feel obliged to share with you an update on how our member states of the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States are handling the pandemic. Since the beginning of the pandemic, the leadership of the OACPS has consistently shared experiences and strategies amongst its members. I am happy to report that the United Nations, the World Bank, and the bilateral global agencies, including bilateral development partners, have responded affirmatively to our appeals for assistance on behalf of the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States. And for this, I express our heartfelt appreciation. May I reiterate that there is so much that we can do as a continent towards achieving Pan-Africanism and to enforce our visibility in the world stage. I welcome the Kusi Festival's dialogue as an important vehicle for promoting Pan-African ideas on innovations, recovery, and sustainability. I salute the huge spirit of innovation blowing across our African continent, particularly that coming from our youth. I therefore encourage my brothers and sisters across Africa to seize this opportunity and indeed to run with it. I am optimistic that the outcomes of the ensuing discussions and panels that will take place here will be mutually beneficial to all. Finally, once again, thanks to all our international and regional participants, the Nation Media Group, the Governor of Kisumu, and our development partners for being part of this dialogue process. I wish you all a happy and safe festive season ahead, and I look forward to working together with you to achieving the noble objectives of our Pan-African ideals. May God bless you all, and may God bless Africa. Thank you.
President Uhuru Kenyatta, we thank you for your virtual participation in this forum and for your support. And with those remarks by the President of Kenya, the Kusi Ideas Festival is officially open here in the county of Kisumu. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause. At this point, I would like to welcome back our Master of Ceremonies, Edmund Nyabola, to take you through the rest of the program. Edmund.
Thank you so much, Smriti, for leading that session. One more time, the official way of applauding our speakers and our moderators. 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much. I think those of us who are Kenyans participating in this, what the President said about reviewing those tax reliefs and perhaps initiating some more would be very critical for us coming at this time. And I think hearing from him as the host President is very important. I know we've just had breakfast a short while ago, but in Kisumu we treat people well. So it's time for lunch, and this is strictly going to take just half an hour. So we expect everyone back into the tent by 2:30 for our next session, which is one of the key sessions we'll be having during this two-day conference, and that's securing growth, the shape of the post-COVID African economy, talking about money, all right? And this will be moderated by our editor, Business and Partnerships, Julian Amboko, with some high-level speakers there as well. As we proceed to lunch, just some quick instructions that I need to bring to your attention. Let's have the first 3 rows with the VIPs. Please just be guided by the ushers to where they're supposed to have their lunch first before the rest of the team moves to lunch. Please, let's have the first 3 rows. You will be guided outside to where you're supposed to be having your lunch. After that, the rest of the participants, you will walk through Gate C on my right, and then we'll have lunch there. Let's first take a break on TV, but we'll be back at 2:30 for the other sessions of this conference. At this moment in time, please, the first 3 rows, let's proceed to lunch. There will be ushers to show you where you will have your lunch.
This is NTV.
When the world changed, it made us go back to the simple joys and love the little things even more. Like serving up your best, eating together, and sharing more. Now, we'll take nothing for granted and always remember to taste the simple joys. Enjoy the magic of Christmas with Coca-Cola.
Hi, I am Eliud Kipchoge, World Marathon Record holder. I am here to encourage you to be active, to keep moving, and be positive in life.